Hello, Audioholics. This is Logan, and welcome back to Audioholics Anonymous. Today, we will be discussing our top 10 favorite bands and artists of all time. And here to help me is my least favorite co-host of all time, Tyler.
What's up?
Tyler the Tyler. I was going to add something at the end, but then I was just like, nah, Tyler. You don't deserve anymore, you plebeian.
What are you talking about? I deserve all of it. All of it.
Whatever. You don't even deserve to be in this video. I just do that out of charity.
No. It's a punishment to be in this video.
Oh, yeah, good point. Good point. And speaking of punishment, top 10 bands and artists of all time, according to us.
Well, at least our favorites.
All right, so I'll start this out. Just to get some things out of the way, we are limiting this to bands that, generally speaking, have a more or less consistent track record. They can have some bad albums, they can have some bad songs, that's fine. But if there's a specific period of bad output, or they only had a specific time period where they gave out good output, then you have a problem, and I don't think they should qualify. They don't have a good band. They have a band that had a golden era. And the other thing is, I want to try and, as a result of this whole golden era philosophy of mine, I try to find bands that have released more than at least 4 albums and have been around for at least 10 to 15 years. So without further ado, let's go to my number 10 pick, U2. This is a band that has definitely had some bad albums, or not even necessarily bad albums, just some albums that are maybe worse than others. But overall, they've been around since the early 1980s, almost 40 years. And for the most part, they've put out consistent quality. I mean, you have classic albums like War and October and The Joshua Tree. But in my opinion, their best album is actually one that a lot of people shit on, and rightly so. The album is Songs of Innocence, and if you don't know what that album is, assuming you have an iPhone, check your music library. You probably already have it, because their distribution method, this is such a genius idea, put it on everybody's iPhone, whether they like it or not. Yeah, can you see why the album might have an unfairly negative reception? But if you actually listen to the album, especially if you are a fan of new wave or just indie pop in general, I think you'll find that it's a pretty good album. I remember when I first heard it, it was one of those like generation defining albums, at least for me. Like, I remember where I was when I first heard that album and it blew me away. But beyond that, obviously you have the hits, you have the New Year's Days, and, you know, I Will Follow, With or Without You, stuff like that. But even if you go deep into their discography, you're going to find quite a few good songs and even some good albums. So at number 10, I have U2.
All right, so for my number 10, I have Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. So this is number 10 solely because it's kind of a newer love for me. I've really only been getting into them for the past 6 to 8 months, somewhere within that time frame. But it's really been a love at first listen kind of thing. Like, I put on Let Love In and it blew me away. I love the soulful vocals, absolutely genius lyricism. And when I, went down their discography further, I found that every album more or less has a different sound, but it all has the Nick Cave fingerprint. So it all sounds like the same band, but it's completely different styles. Amazing fucking band. If you haven't given these guys a chance, you need to check out the album Let Love In. It's got the probably the biggest song that they've made on it, Red Right Hand. That's the one that you would probably know, if any. But the album outside of that is absolutely phenomenal, a complete masterpiece. Uh, Murder Ballads is also fucking amazing. So yeah, that's Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds at number 10.
So at number 9, I have Riot. Riot is maybe a little bit lesser known if you aren't really interested in rock or metal, especially like classic rock, classic metal. And I will include Riot V or 5 or whatever they are actually supposed to be called, even if they do only have one album, because it is more or less just the same members that have been in Riot for the past maybe 10 years or so, barring a few exceptions. So to me, Riot is, they don't do anything profound. At least I wouldn't say so anyway. But what they do is they put together classic music that just works. It sounds good. It has a nice groove. It has some good guitar parts. And it's just good. I was originally going to do sort of a retrospective video on them, actually. I ultimately didn't. Maybe I will in the future. But as a result, I got Tyler into some of their songs as well. They have some classic rock, at least sort of like when they started out. Then they started getting into some power metal. They did an album that's essentially Queensryche fan fiction. Don't listen to that album. And they've done a whole bunch of different things as well, including like blues rock and things like that. You have the amazing guitarist, you have the variety of different really good vocalists. And for my money, it is the best, lesser known, underrated power metal act. So as far as albums go, my pick to get into these groups, my pick to get into these guys is Thundersteel. Thundersteel is an amazing album back to front. Fight or Fall, Johnny's Back, Flight of the Warrior, On Eagle's Wings, just some fantastic anthemic rockin' heavy metal tunes. So Riot is number 9 for me.
All right, so speaking of anthemic heavy metal, at number 9 for me, we have Gojira. Now, Gojira is at this point pretty blazing. They're pretty mainstream. Everybody knows who they are, but I saw them live and the guitar player got lit on fire and he finished the set. So if that's not enough for you to check them out,
I think that
I don't really know
deserves
what
like
to
a
tell you.
couple rungs up. Like, what the hell? Why are they only number 9 for you?
That's just a testament, wink, wink, nudge, 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 of how much I love the bands that come after Gojira. But Gojira, I can more or less credit for getting me into extreme music. Gojira was the band that eventually influenced me to check out death metal like Death, Morbid Angel, and eventually even bands like Opeth and black metal and things like that I never really listened to before. I mean, yeah, I listened to bands like Slipknot, but I wouldn't really consider Slipknot extreme metal, despite the fact that they do use harsh vocals. It was really Gojira that got me into that sort of section of metal. The album that I recommend is From Mars to Sirius. Just the guitar tone of that album is so massive. The concept relating to climate change is very impactful, great lyricism. There's nothing to dislike about this album. Check it out.
And I would actually, just as an addendum to that, I listened to that album and I'm not a huge fan of extreme metal at all. If you know me through this channel, you know me in real life, whatever. I loved that album. I was right there with Tyler, loving the hell out of that album. And they released a new album this year as well, and that one's also pretty good, if not maybe a little more dynamic and less extreme metal.
Yeah, it's a lot proggier. I enjoy it quite a bit. I'm still kind of teetering on whether or not it's my new favorite, but it's definitely up there for me, which
Yeah.
I think is kind of controversial. This one's kind of been decisive or divisive for Gojira fans. But either way, check them out.
So at number 8, I have Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin is a band, you know who Led Zeppelin is. Um, I mean, do I even need to explain why this band is amazing and has stood the test of time? Robert Plant's vocals, as worn out as they might have been towards the end, are fantastic. Jimmy Page, legendary guitarist. John Bonham, one of the best drummers to use a standard drum set. And
And
John
that
Paul
is
Jones,
absolutely it.
huh?
No other members.
Oh
Just
yeah,
Robert,
that's right. That's
just
right.
Plant,
There are
Page,
no other
Bonham.
there are
No
no
other members in
they
Led
were
Zeppelin.
going to have like a bassist, but then they realized nobody cares about that. Right. So Led Zeppelin, I mean, I would say this, if you were turned off by some of the earlier Led Zeppelin, especially because of like some of the plagiarism shit that has come out later, like later on and more recently, do yourself a favor, get yourself started with some of the later Led Zeppelin stuff. There, I think they took a more original direction. Yeah, they were still blues rock and hard rock, and yeah, but like, I think they had more of an identity, Houses of the Holy onward. And in fact, Houses of the Holy is the album that I recommend by Led Zeppelin. I think it's just purely the album that gives off the most variety and consistent quality. No Quarter is one of my favorite songs of all time. Just that guitar tone. Like I don't know, maybe Tyler can tell me differently, but I can't think of anybody who's really done that exact same guitar tone as done in No Quarter. Like it, or at least like to a point where it sounds like even remotely similar. Um and then you have songs like The Ocean, Dancing Days, the song remains the same. And Jamaica, which is actually how it's supposed to be pronounced. Yeah, I bet you never noticed that pun. I'm sorry. But it's just a really good album. Maybe some songs are a little bit better than others, and maybe you could argue it's a little bit short, but I think it's the best album to really get into the band. I wouldn't even say it's necessarily my favorite. Presence might take that crown for me, but if you are just getting into the band, I cannot recommend Houses of the Holy, and I definitely cannot recommend highly enough my number 8 pick, Led Zeppelin.
All right, so my number 8 pick is Blue Oyster Cult. Now, these guys I would consider the most underrated classic rock band out there, maybe with exception to Uriah Heep. Nobody knows Blue Oyster Cult outside of the hits, mainly Don't Fear the Reaper. A lot of people don't even know Godzilla, if you can believe that.
Really?
This band is so much more than Don't Fear the Reaper, okay? This band is full of amazing musicianship, phenomenal blues guitar parts, great fantastical lyricism and songwriting. You're missing out if the only song you know by Blue Oyster Cult is Don't Fear the Reaper. Frankly, that's one of my least favorite songs by them. Maybe because it's overplayed, but I just think they have so many better songs. Astronomy, top tier music for me. One of my favorite songs of all fucking time. You know, the entire Cultosaurus Erectus album is full of underrated classic rock jams like Black Blade and uh, Lips in the Hills. And, you know, you can point at every album and find just fantastic music off it. Fire of Unknown Origin, Veteran of the Psychic Wars. But the album that I recommend you to start with to prove my point that you need to listen to more of these guys is Secret Treaties. It was their third album, and it remains my personal favorite in their discography. phenomenal musicianship, great songs from front to back. Check it out.
All right, so at number 7, we have The Who. The Who is another one of those bands that I don't think really needs an explanation, but maybe to some of the people who only know the hits like Baba O'Reilly, Behind Blue Eyes, Who Are You, otherwise known as that theme song from CSI. I think you might be doing yourself a disservice by not listening to some of the proper albums, things like Tommy or Quadrophenia, or in my case, the album that I recommend, Who's Next. Now, Who's Next is not a completely ambitious project like Tommy or Quadrophenia, or at least it didn't turn out that way. If you want to look up what Who's Next was supposed to be, just look up the Lighthouse Project and listen to some of the demos there. It's honestly pretty cool. But ultimately, what you do have is a collection of really good songs. Baba O'Reilly and Behind Blue Eyes, which are, of course, the hits, and of course, We Don't Get Fooled Again. But we also have songs like Bargain, Going Mobile, Love Ain't for Keeping, The Song Is Over, My Wife, just some great classic rock tunes. And it's another one of those bands where it's just synchronicity to a point where most of the people in The Who are multi-instrumentalists, which is something I always appreciate in music. So that is my number 7, The Who.
All right, now for an infinitely better band than the fucking Who, we have Testament, my personal easy favorite thrash metal band. I don't really think that's under debate. Like, people try to say bands like Megadeth and Metallica and Anthrax and Slayer are the best thrash metal bands out there. Fuck you. The New Order, that album alone is better than anything any of those bands have put out, with exception to Rust in Peace, which is, in my opinion, the best thrash metal album ever made. But that's the only Megadeth album that even touches that shit. Testament, I mean, really, Alex Skolnick is the heart of that band. Alex Skolnick is an absolutely phenomenal fucking guitar player. He brings influence from classical and jazz music, which he actually, by the way, fun fact about Alex Skolnick, he doesn't like to play thrash music much. He actually prefers to play jazz. He plays thrash metal so that he can fund his jazz project. I always thought that was really funny. It's like a complete fucking opposites.
Well, he knows
Talk
where
about
his
turn your
audience
brain off
is.
music. But yeah, the guy's a fucking ridiculous guitar player. He's a complete beast. And then you've got like Chuck Billy on vocals, who's arguably the best thrash vocalist of all time. Super dynamic.
Totally
He can
lame
do
name.
everything from like your Halford screams to your growls to like death metal vocals to just damn good thrash vocals. Like, the dude is crazy good. Their songwriting is actually kind of progressive at times, depending on where you look. And even when Alex Skolnick left the band and we got Death Metal Testament and then Pantera Testament, and eventually we got The Gathering, which was like a melding of the two, James Murphy is a beast guitar player, and The Gathering remains one of their best albums. You can really just throw a dart and you'll find amazing fucking metal music within Testament's discography. But as I said earlier, The New Order is, in my opinion, the best of their albums, and I recommend that you check that shit out ASAP. In fact, stop this video, go check out The New Order. I mean, it's not a long album. You'll
Continue
probably
the
come
video
back with half your brain
afterwards.
cells
Don't get
because
me
you'll
wrong.
headbang them
See
all
the
away.
video afterwards. Trust me, it'll be great. We'll like throw this dude in a fire for his terrible opinions, saying that Testament is better than the Who. It'll be fun.
The Who suck. Okay, go on. That was number 7.
Right. So my number 6 is a band that's better than all of them, Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd, I originally wasn't actually going to put them on the list because I sort of thought of them as one of those more golden era bands. Like, yeah, they had good albums before and even after their golden era, but I think their golden era is more well known. And I'm, of course, talking about Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals, and The Wall. But if you go beyond that, you have some pretty good albums. You have the kind of controversial, but in my opinion, masterpiece that is The Final Cut. And before that, you have albums like Echoes, and even going back further, you have their first album with the ill-fated, unfortunately, Sid Barrett. Pink Floyd might have started out as a more psychedelic band, but they quickly evolved beyond that, making themselves one of the most technical bands of all time. Definitely one of the bands that plays the most with atmosphere. I can't think of another band that really sounds like Pink Floyd, even though I have heard some Haken songs that sound relatively close enough to where you could at least compare the two. I don't know if that's necessarily representative of their entire discography, though. I haven't listened to them enough to really say that. But what I can say is that Pink Floyd, even regardless, stands in a field of their own. My number one recommendation, well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious: Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, if you haven't heard this album, what are you doing right here? Forget New Order. Listen to Dark Side of the Moon. Listen to something good. I mean, come on. You have taste, right? But I would even say after listening to Dark Side of the Moon, watch Polyphonic's video series on the album, because he does a pretty good job going in depth into the themes and the meanings behind all of the songs and what all kind of ties them together. And beyond that, it's just a really good technical album with really good instrumentation. And again, that classic synchronicity of there's really no aspect of the band the that really carries the album or really carries the band as a whole. So my number 6 pick is Pink Floyd.
Yeah, Pink Floyd maybe one day will be on my list, but I've had such a love-hate relationship with them my whole life. I used to adore them, and then I hated them for a while, and then I liked them, and then I hated them again, and now I'm kind of getting back on the bandwagon and starting to appreciate it again. We'll see where I am in a year. I don't know. Like, part of my problem with Pink Floyd is that The Wall is overrated. It's boring and long-winded. I'm sorry I
God,
had to say
Tyler, you're
that.
so schizophrenic. It sounds like you might have brain damage,
Ah. Dark Side of the Moon is obviously a phenomenal album, arguably better than any album he or I are going to list today. But outside of that, and maybe Wish You Were Here, I don't think Pink Floyd have ever even come remotely in the same dimension as those albums. So I don't really think they belong on this list, but that's me. My number
Feel free to
6
be wrong.
is Candlemass. And I kind of struggled with putting Candlemass on here because I adore Candlemass. They're one of my favorite bands, super influential to me. I love the epic, larger than life songwriting of the band, even if the lyrics are sometimes really stupid. They're lovably stupid. Messiah's over the top operatic vocals. You've got Johann's kind of dark and moody vocals in the first album, and you can really take your pick. But after Messiah left, you get some weird shit. Like chapter 6 was like thrash Candlemass, and it kind of worked. And later you got like proggy space rock doom with Dactylus Glomerata or whatever. And like they just go some weird places, okay? But I think ultimately the reason why I think it's okay to put them here is because I don't think there's really any albums that they've made that are less than really good. Like you're certainly going to have preferences. Maybe you'll prefer the Messiah era. Maybe you'll prefer uh, the guy from Solitude Eternus, his era. Maybe you like the first album and nothing else. I don't know. You're going to have your preferences because it's all different. But I think the fact that people can have those preferences, there is a person out there where Chapter 6 is one of their favorite Candlemass albums. The fact that that's even possible proves to me that the albums are really good, even if you may not prefer them compared with the other Candlemass albums that you do prefer. So that was a really long-winded explanation, but I think it belongs here. Now, what album am I going to recommend? Well, again, I kind of fought with myself on that, but ultimately I recommend Nightfall, which is the first album that they did with Messiah Marcolin, who's known for his over-the-top operatic vocals. And no, it doesn't sound like the first album, which is very dark and dreary and moody. It's more over the top and epic sounding, but that is what Candlemass is. They are an epic doom metal band, and their influence derives from the Messiah Marcolin era, mostly, I would say, easily. Bands like Grand Magus and pretty much every band in that realm exists solely because of the Messiah Marcolin era. What songs are on this album to deserve this? How about At the Gallows End, one of the best epic doom songs ever? What about The Well of Souls with its like infinitesimal fucking movements and cool riffs? What about Bewitched with the funniest music video I've ever fucking seen? Just a great fucking album from front to end. If what you want is Black Sabbath, but spun a new way with operatic vocals, well, you're weird, but got your band. So that was my number 6.
Hey, you know how you were talking about those crazy people who prefer the thrash era of Candlemass?
Yeah.
Moving swiftly along, number 5 is a band that I don't think needs any introduction. They're a British band. They just released hit after hit after hit. They were like amazing musicians. I am of course talking about the Beatles. And the Beatles, I mean, you at least know who the Beatles are, right? Maybe you only know a couple of songs. Maybe you've only heard some stuff like Strawberry Fields, Across the Universe, Yellow Submarine, or my personal favorite, It's Okay to Leave Your Dog in a Hot
Yes.
That video's funny. Look it up. Look up the Beatles. It's okay to leave your dog in a hot car. But beyond that, they have some amazing albums. From one of the first mainstream rock concept albums, a la Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, to a band that kind of continues on with that musical theme in Magical Mystery Tour, to Let It Be and its more stripped back approach, to the White Album and its WTF isms. But ultimately, the album that I recommend is what is, in my opinion, their last album, even though, like, according to how timeline works, it's not. It was actually Let It Be, but Abbey Road was the last one they really worked on. Abbey Road, spoiler alert. I mean, it's just a good album with some good polish behind it. Come Together, Here Comes the Sun, Something. Those are the hits off of the album, and Octopus Garden, which is a song that exists. But what you also have is some really good multi-part epics like Carry That Weight and Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, uh, You Never Give Me No Money, those types of songs. If you want something really heavy, you have I Want You, She's So Heavy. If you want something that's maybe a little bit more indicative of old school Beatles sound, check out Oh Darling. And if you want an overall good band, just listen to the fucking Beatles. That is at number 5.
All right, so my number 5 is Dream Theater. Now, this is a band that for the longest time, you'll hear Logan say this occasionally, that Dream Theater is just mindless wankery fests and they don't really know how to make music. And I used to agree with that. I couldn't get into the band because of their like 5 minutes instrumental sections, and it was just bad. But at some point, it just all clicked for me. I was listening to Octavarium. That was the album that got me into the band. And it just all clicked for me. Songs like Panic Attack, songs like The Root of All Evil, where there's just memorable hooks, meaningful lyrics, awesome riffs, and well-crafted solos. You know, you've got keyboard solos from the fucking monster keyboardist Jordan Rudess. You've got, like, obviously John Petrucci is a great fucking guitar player, and he has some amazing solos on that album. Panic Attack is great, but the title track, Octavarium, is mind-blowing, to put it lightly. Like, the first time you listened to Dark Side of the Moon and it blew your mind, that's what it was like for someone like me listening to Octavarium. It's a life-changing experience listening to that song. But that's just one album. You know, dig into 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. If you're the type of person who has mental health issues, that album is going to be super fucking emotional and impactful for you. If you like stories, look into Scenes from a Memory. It's a very well-written album with a really cool story and some really memorable songs on it, like Fatal Tragedy, and it even has the Dance of Eternity, which is perhaps the most insane song ever written. It has like 100 fucking time signature changes. That's not a joke. It has over 100 time signature changes. You can look up a video of Mike Portnoy like explaining it. He's like, okay, so this section is 5/8, and then 2 seconds later it's like 6/8. And now we have, dude, you're talking in a different language. But I think that even later Dream Theater, like Distance Over Time is, I think, the newest one. That one, it's more mainstream. So if you can't get around like long instrumental sections, check out that era of Dream Theater, because it's a lot more straightforward metal music with shorter song times. And maybe that'll be able to be something that gets you into earlier Dream Theater. That's pretty much all I can tell you to try and get you to make it click for you, because that's really what it is. Like, it has to click for you. Otherwise, it's just going to sound like noise. A lot of these early songs through Images and Words and Awake, and, you know, even the later albums, because they love their fucking instrumental sections. But for me, this is a band that has led to me crying. I've had deeply emotional experiences with this band. It has been life-changing for me. So this has to be here somewhere. Number 5, Dream Theater.
Well, Dream Theater is pretty good, with Portnoy and John Petrucci and James LaBoombalati, but if
Oh
you
yeah,
can't,
and also, just for the record, John Myung is such a fucking underrated bass player. If you ever
I didn't
watch
even
him
know what
live,
the
the
fuck
dude's a
his name
fucking
was.
monster. He's a monster.
But of
Anyway.
course, none of those people would be there if not for my number 4 pick, Rush.
Oh, there you go.
Rush is just, I mean, Rush, you could maybe say, is sort of like Babby's first prog, but I see it as it's Dream Theater, but people can actually listen to it who, don't have an ego the size of Mount Everest. Rush is just a fantastic band. From their earlier, more Led Zeppelin inspired stuff to their gigantic epics such as 2112 and Hemispheres, to their more mainstream commercial peak such as Permanent Waves or Moving Pictures, to their more synth era, to their most recent album, which was actually their first and only concept album, of course, before Neil Peart died. But aside from all of that, there's just so many different eras of Rush to get into, and all of them are, in my opinion, to some degree, worth checking out. I mean, they wouldn't. I mean, if they didn't have a consistent career, they probably wouldn't be on this list now, would they? My favorite album, at least to recommend getting you into the band, would be Permanent Waves, though. You have the hits like Free Will and The Spirit of Radio, but if you've only listened to those two songs, you're missing out, man. You're missing out. Natural Science alone blows everything on that album out of the water. Um, Jacob's Ladder is just a really good, I'd say maybe the closest thing that album has to a real epic, even though they weren't really doing those around this time. But overall, it's just a front to back magnificent album. If you're into prog rock or if you're just into some good classic rock, I cannot recommend Rush highly enough at number 4.
Yeah, but if you're gonna listen to Led Zeppelin rip-off era of Rush, listen to that shit live. It's so much better live.
Oh my god, yeah, I didn't even mention that. The what is it? All the World's a Stage.
Mm-hmm.
And Exit Stage Left is a really good live album as well. I'm aware they have other good live albums as well. I haven't really given them much of a listen, but I don't doubt that the later ones are good as well.
Yeah, I think I wanted to put Rush on too, but my problem is they have that entire synth era, which I basically hate. The only exception is Grace Under Pressure, but every other album in there I just do not like.
Bruh, you're breaking my balls, bruh.
Signals, Power
Signals is
Windows,
an
Hold My
amazing
Fire,
album. If
like,
you do not like Analog Kid, you don't like life, okay?
and even like a lot of the albums later on, like Presto and Roll My Bones, like they just have too many bad
It's
albums for
called
me.
Roll the
Like
Bones,
there's
and
too many fucking
it's called Roll the
holes in their
Bones, you idiot.
discography. Whatever. I don't care. That album sucks.
You don't like Signals. You don't like the album with Analog Kid with like
I
the
don't.
best bass song of all time.
So my number 4 is
Even
going
even
to
matters
be
at this point with your terrible taste.
Opeth. So Opeth is another band that took me a long time to get into, to say the least. Everybody was like, oh, you like Dream Theater? Oh, you like Heavy Dream Theater? Oh, that's cool. Check out Opeth. You're going to love them. Don't check out Opeth if you're looking for Heavy Dream Theater. That is not what you get with Opeth. Ever. Not in any song in their entire discography. That is not what you get. Bad fucking advice. I went into that Blackwater Park album expecting Heavy Dream Theater, and I went out of it mortified. Just fucking traumatized by that album. I listened to Blackwater Park probably like 10 times before like this band finally clicked for me. And it wasn't even Blackwater Park that got it to click for me. It was Still Life. I should have started with that album. Opeth is a band that I love because, well, one, they tell amazing stories. My Arms Rehearse is a fucking amazing concept album. Still Life is an amazing concept album. These albums blow Scenes from a Memory out of the water in terms of the concept and the story. I think Scenes from a Memory is arguably better musically, but story-wise, Opeth wins in a heartbeat. But even their later albums that are in the death metal era, like Watershed and Damnation, like they don't have. Well, I guess Damnation isn't the one I'm thinking of. Think of Deliverance. That's the heavy one. They don't have a story per se, but nonetheless, the albums are still perfectly woven together. And that's pretty much what you get with Opeth as a whole. They are, or I should say, Michael Ackerfeld is just a masterful composer, a masterful songwriter. I don't even think I can think of someone except for maybe like Bach who's as good at composing music as Michael Ackerfeld. This man is just a genius.
I think they're okay.
Like every song is probably over 10 minutes, but it never feels like it because there's so many different movements and melodies playing over top and so much going on that you can focus on, and things are ever changing. They're not afraid to let you sit on a musical passage, like if a real cool riff is there, like a really beautiful acoustic line, they'll let you sit on it for quite a few bars. But what they'll do is they'll layer lead lines and different little instruments, and like they do that to make it interesting so it doesn't feel like you're listening to the same thing over and over again. That's just genius. And they perfectly blend what's normally called the demon and angel songwriting. So you've got the demon, which is, death metal, heavy in your face, evil fucking shit. And then you've got the beautiful Floydian kind of soundscapes that Ackerfeld is able to conjure up with his amazing, just atmospheric acoustic sounds. I've never heard a band with just ASMR acoustic guitar. That is what Opeth is. Especially in albums like Blackwater Park and Still Life, their acoustic tone and sound in the mix is just bliss on the ears. And you know what's great about Opeth? So you don't really enjoy death metal. Okay, cool. They have Damnation, which is essentially just an entire acoustic album. You really like the acoustic parts? You like Pink Floyd? Listen to Damnation. You like death metal? Okay, listen to Deliverance. That's what that's there for. You really like prog? Okay,
Damnation.
well, guess what? You got Still Life. You really like classic prog and you don't really like the death metal vocals? Okay, listen to their newer stuff. Sorceress, In Cauda Venenum. They have everything for everybody, and it's just the perfect blend of good music and complex music. It never feels technical for technical's sake. It's all there to supplement the song. So yeah, Opeth. And the album that I'm recommending is Ghost Reveries because it's a good mix of your clean Floydian soundscapes, the acoustic stuff. They have multiple like ballads on the album that are just beautiful, but then they've got the really heavy death metal shit too. So like you kind of know which direction to go in after listening to Ghost Reveries. If you don't like any of it, then quit. But if you really like the death metal, you can go early Opeth. If you like the more clean stuff, well, you know where to go. So it's a good album to get into the band with. So that is my number 4.
All right, my number 3 is one that he already touched on. He already picked on his list, and living proof that a broken clock can still be correct twice a day. Blue Oyster Cult. Blue Oyster Cult, I mean, he basically said all that needs to be said, but I mean, like, some of your best songs were written by a science fiction writer. How can they not be on both of our lists? He picked Secret Treaties, and actually originally so did I, so I decided to pick a different one. Fire of Unknown Origins. It has some really good stuff, and I think has a little bit more variety anyway. I mean, you have the title track, you have Burning for You, which is the hit off of that album and the most classic rock sounding, and overall just a really good song. You have Veteran of the Psychic Wars, which is really synthy and eerie, and you have Heavy Metal, which, unlike the previously mentioned Veteran of the Psychic Wars, was not in the movie of the same title, but almost was until the damn Red Rider took that thunder. Not Red Rider, Red Rocker, I think was right. Sammy Hagar. I don't know. You also have, there's a lot of people who say the second half of that album isn't as good. I don't know what they're smoking. Come on, Joan Crawford is not a good song. I mean, yeah, you could make the argument that it's kind of poor taste, but still, it's a good song. But overall, Blue Oyster Cult is just another example of a thing that I've mentioned time and time again throughout this video: synchronicity. When all of the members of a band come together and as a combined effort put out some really good music. Nobody's upstaging each other. Nobody's trying to make 15-minute long guitar solos. They just make good music that would not be good if any one of those people were changed out, except for Blue Oyster Cult, because I mean their new album, even though like the one dude died, it's still really good. I mean, seriously, listen to the new album. It's really, really fucking good. And so is Blue Oyster Cult at number 3.
All right, so my number 3 is Symphony X. Now, Symphony X is an interesting band because I don't really think you can classify them as really any one thing. Are they prog? I mean, sometimes. Are they thrash? Sometimes. Are they groove metal? Yeah, sometimes. Are they speed metal like Ingve or something? Yeah,
Sometimes.
sometimes. No, you really can't put them under any one label because they just do all of these things constantly throughout their albums. Uh, and arguably they've gotten better with age. They're not really doing the really long epics anymore, but they're getting heavier and thrashier, and but it's still got the odd time signatures and like super fast, crazy, complex riffs. But for some reason, Michael Romeo is able to craft these incredibly technical, complex, and just really fast riffs, but they always have a groove to them. Like you can always headbang to a Symphony X song, even if you can't even like imagine how the riff is played. It's still got that groove to it. Like fuck yeah, dude, yeah. You can hear the influence of bands like Dream Theater, Pantera. They wear their influences on their sleeves for sure, but it works for them. Um, they've got their concept albums like Paradise Lost and Underworld, but they don't really follow a story as much as the songs are kind of about the concept. Like in Underworld, all the songs are kind of about hell. In Paradise Lost, a lot of the songs, not all of them actually, but a lot of them are about, well, the epic poem Paradise Lost and the sequel, which I forget the name of. And you go earlier in their discography, like Divine Wings of Tragedy, that album front to back is just amazing. Why? Because you've got progressive songs like The Accolade. That's something you could easily see a band like Pink Floyd doing. Then you've got super metal songs like Of Sins and Shadows. You can headbang that whole fucking song. You could hear maybe Pantera doing that. Then you've got like the 20-minute epic at the end, the title track. You could see a band like Rush or Dream Theater doing that. It's just chock full of variety. And if you're a person who enjoys this kind of music, Symphony X is the band for you. Also, they're considered power metal too. So really, you can't classify them as anything. The album that I recommend is The Odyssey. So The Odyssey is really heavy. It's got your, like, the first song is the perfect example of what you need and what you're going to expect in this band. It's called Inferno, and it's just masterful. You listen to that song, and it's just, I can't explain it to you. You just have to listen to this album on your own and realize what I'm talking about. It's so fast. It's so groovy. It's so catchy. It's proggy. It's heavy. It's everything all in one. It's epic. Symphony X. Check it out, people.
So my number 2, and I of course take the best number 2s, is Judas Priest. Judas Priest, yeah,
Boo!
how
Judas
dare you?
Priest.
How dare you? How dare you? I'm going to interrupt my spiel right now just to talk about how terrible of a person you are. Okay, that's enough. Right, Judas Priest. Judas Priest, I think maybe some people might have the impression of them as just like, oh, they're the 80s hair metal, whatever, rockers. They're more than that. And they've especially proven that as of recently with albums like Firepower and Redeemer of Souls. But even since the beginning, they had the borderline prog metal. Crap, why can't I think of the name of the album? It's the second album, the one after Rockarola. But they also have
Sin After
Stained
Shadow or
Class.
Sin After Sin or something like that.
Huh?
Isn't that it? Isn't it like Sin After Sin or something
No,
like
that was
that?
the third one, whatever.
Is that the third one? I don't know.
Yeah, it was the third one. But you know, they also have Hellbent for Leather. They have some really good live albums. And they have the album that I'm going to recommend today, Screaming for Vengeance. It's more of their, well, 80s sound because, well, hey, guess what? It came out in the 80s, but it does also have a lot of just really good anthemic metal tunes. You have Electric Eye, you have Bloodstone, you have Another Thing Coming. You have so many good metal tunes. And there you have number 2.
You have this song. You have Another Thing Coming. You have I don't know why that was so funny. But yeah, no, Judas Priest deserves to be on the list. The reason they're not on mine is I'm going to piss people off. I only really like a certain era of Judas Priest. I like their new albums because it's a callback to this era, and that's the 80s era. Defenders of the
I
Faith
mean, you're not
and
alone in that in
Screaming
that
for Vengeance.
opinion, I guess, but I mean, Stained Class, I just have a personal connection to that album
Yeah, but I
because
don't. And I don't like Hellbent for Leather, and I don't like Sin After Sin, and I don't like Rock'n'Rolla. I don't like Turbo Lover. I don't like the No Swan that everyone hates. I'm just not huge on them outside of like that 80s speed metal sound.
yeah.
The only exception to that being the one that you were talking about that has Victim of Changes on it.
I need to look up the name of that album when you go on your spiel. I can't like live with not knowing what that album is.
That album
No,
is
it says
probably my
Orphan
favorite
Children.
Judas Priest album, but the problem is no album they made sounds even remotely like it. And I don't think any band sounds even remotely
I
like it,
mean, it's a
honestly. It's
little
pretty
bit
unique.
flawed. Like especially Halford's vocals in that album, especially when he hits like the lower end. I
I
don't know.
love his low end in that album.
I
Like, I
don't
can
know. I
understand
like
why
it
you
later
wouldn't, but
on when
I
he kind
do.
of incorporated like the Sad Wings of Destiny. That's what it's called.
Yes, that's what it
But
is.
I kind of liked it when he like had more of a growl. I think Razorfist kind of said it best. He sounds like a bad lounge singer when he does low end on Sad Wings of Destiny.
I mean, he does kind of sound like a lounge singer, but like I kind of
A
like
bad
that
lounge
sound.
singer though. He like
I
it's
don't
not
know if I would call it
he
bad,
tries to be
personally.
Frank Sinatra and he just can't.
I just don't agree. I love his vocals on that album. But yeah, so that's the reason why Judas Priest can't be on my list, even though I do love Judas Priest. So my number 2 is Haken. Haken is a band that needs no introduction. If you know me, I've talked about them incessantly and will probably continue to talk about them incessantly.
Oh joy.
Haken is the best prog metal band in the scene right now, without a doubt. They are the closest band I think I've ever seen to hitting the mainstream and sounding as complex as they are. Like, the songs that they have that are just insane, like Visions and Crystallized, like, they do get wanky at times and they're insane and complex and whatever, but they're also super fucking catchy. There's so many hooks and memorable melodies and things like that thrown in. Like, Crystallized alone has like 4 or 5 hooks in that song that I could probably sing to you right now because it's just that memorable. And then that's just songs. Like, you want to talk about albums? All right, how about Aquarius? That album front to back is full of amazing hooks and melodies and awesome atmosphere, and the band is kind of perfection in the sort of synchronicity that he was talking about earlier. At least they are in their most of their discography. They've kind of become thrashy and riffy with the last few albums, which is a welcome change, but they weren't like that at first. No one band member kind of ever took the spotlight. Every single element of the orchestra supported each other. And that's what really felt like listening to Haken, was like you're listening to an orchestra and a really fucking good pop singer singing over top of it. And by the way, Ross Jennings, one of the best vocalists of all time. Fuck you if you disagree. You're just wrong. He has amazing range, amazing tone. He can do 100 different things. He can do death metal vocals. He can do growly vocals. And I don't mean death metal vocals. I mean like bluesy type vocals. He can do clean. He can do everything. And he sounds amazing doing it all. He's getting a solo album soon. You need to keep an eye on that because I promise you it will be good. So the
What
album
if it
that I
turns out to be
recommend to you,
terrible and you just end up eating crow though? Like,
the album I recommend to you is The Mountain. So this is their most mainstream album. It has their biggest hit on it, Cockroach King, the song that kind of put them on the map. It's got a lot of poppy sort of songs that are just, poppy. There's not really a whole lot going on in those songs, but it also has really long, complex songs like Paradolia that remind you of like Tool or Dream Theater. And it has songs like Atlas or Atlas Rises or Atlas Falls or something like that. That song, super impactful, super motivational. And the lyrics throughout the album kind of are in that sort of same line. I know people have called it a concept album, but I don't really see that. I know like the idea is that it's a guy who's going like through a hard time in his life, and the whole album is like him getting back on his feet and making a difference in the world or something like that. That's what I've heard it's supposed to be about, but I don't really see that with the lyrics. They just are upbeat songs meant to inspire you for the most part. There's a song on there about death and coping with death, and sometimes they get into darker topics like that. But for the most part, it's just a very inspirational album. So if you're looking for a new prog band to get into, Haken is the band for you. And if you're not into prog, I still suggest checking out Haken because they're pretty much the band that got me into prog. I was not a Dream Theater fan before I listened to Haken. Haken was the one who got me into Dream Theater. So I mean, if it got my ass into prog, it could probably get you into prog too. So yeah, Haken number 2.
all right, and before I get to my number one, I just want to go over some quick honorable mentions. Um, we have Vampire Weekend. There's some pretty good indie pop. Witchfinder General, really good, kind of obscure, like British new wave of heavy metal band that unfortunately didn't put out a whole lot, and as a result is a little bit more obscure. Oingo Boingo, they're a band fronted by the who I think might now be more known for his soundtrack writing, visionary that is Danny Elfman, but Oingo Boingo is how he started. I haven't really gotten too much into them yet, but I understand like the one album I listened to, my understanding is that it's pretty consistently good. You have Typo Negative. They are another band that I like because I've heard like one album and I've heard the other ones are really good as well, but I just need to get more into them. And finally, Rolling Stones. Yeah, they're kind of a golden era band, but their golden era is pretty good with albums like Let It Bleed and Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street. So, are you going to do your honorable mentions before we get to number one?
Yeah. So to start off, we have Iced Earth, who should be on this list, but due to recent events, I can't really look at them the same way, and I haven't been listening to them as much as a result. So I'm keeping them off for that. Plus, like, their early albums are easily the only ones you should listen to anyway. Jethro Tull, mostly here because I only really love a certain era of Jethro Tull, but that era is really fucking good. You got Aqualung, Thick as a Brick, Songs from the Wood, Benefits. Amazing music, dude. And I do like a lot of their other albums too, but just not as much. Santana, kind of another example of golden era band. Like you only really like their first few albums, and then after that, they kind of go in weird directions, and it's just not as good. King Crimson, I wanted to put King Crimson on the list, but I just frankly aren't as into them as I should be if I'm putting them on a list of my favorite bands. I've only really heard a few albums, actually. In the Court of the Crimson King, Red, Tongues in Lark Aspic, or whatever the fuck that album is called. That's it, I think. I want to get more into them. It's just King Crimson is a hard band to listen to sometimes. They are very obtuse. And finally, we have Nevermore, who is a band that I adore, but I wouldn't really say any of their albums are truly great, like masterpiece level albums, so they really couldn't be on the list. There you go.
Right. So, my number one pick is The Return of Bruno by Bruce Willis. Seriously, this album is an absolute masterpiece. No. My
It's
number
really the
one,
Shags.
and just not even Bruce Willis as a whole, just that album. No, my number one favorite artist or band in this case is boom, boom,
I'm
boom,
surprised it wasn't the Beatles, honestly.
Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath is an amazing band. I think I've said that like 10 different times, but these are all amazing different bands. I mean, from the beginning stuff with Ozzy to Dio and the speed metal that ensued from that collaboration, even some of the stuff that's maybe a little bit lesser known, like Ian Gillan, the Tony Iommi solo, not quite solo, it's all debatable album. Tony Martin has some really good underrated stuff. And then there's like the Heaven and Hell side project, which wasn't very good. Black Sabbath is a very good band, and they've had a lot of great albums. If you want some doomy stuff, might I recommend, I don't know, the first decade of their career. If you want some speed metal, might I recommend Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. If you want some good blues metal, I recommend The Seventh Star. Not an album talked about very much, and depending on who you ask, not even really a Black Sabbath album, but still a really good album nonetheless. Just again, here's that magical word of the day again, synchronicity. And it's especially unique in Ozzy in Black Sabbath's case because they've had so many different lineups over the years, and they've all kind of matched that level of synchronicity. Not only have they had different vocalists, they've had different drummers, they've had different bassists. The guitarist has always stayed consistent, Tony Iommi, but all of them kind of go together. They don't really upstage each other. Yeah, you could maybe argue it's a more Tony Iommi influenced band, but Tony Iommi is not Black Sabbath by himself. It's Tony Iommi mixed with the people surrounding Tony Iommi that really make the final product shine. If you want the album that I recommend, Volume 4. There are a couple of really good Black Sabbath albums from all different eras of the band, but Volume 4, I think, has the most variety. And I think you're more likely to find something that you personally enjoy off of that album. If you want some just straight up doom metal, how about, like Cornucopia or something like that? You have Changes, which is a fucking piano ballad, and even that doesn't entirely suck. Um, you have the really heavy Snowblind about drug addiction. It's just such a really great album. And, well, it comes from my number one band, Black Sabbath. Let's see your inferior number one.
Yeah, so we have the same number one. My number one is
Oh, well,
also
I
Black
mean,
Sabbath.
no, I'm actually going to have to move that back down to number two just because. And my real number one actually is Bruce Willis. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you said, except for the part that Tony Iommi by himself is not Black Sabbath. Let me tell you why you're wrong. If you take Ozzy out of Ozzy, what do you have?
Randy Rhoads.
You have nothing. You have
No,
nothing.
Randy Rhoads carries at least the first two Ozzy
Yeah,
albums.
the first two albums, but he's replaced, and then Zach Wilde is replaced, and then Jakey Lee is replaced because the guitar players don't matter in Ozzy. What makes Ozzy Ozzy is Ozzy. You take Ozzy away, you don't have Ozzy anymore. Same thing applies to Dio. And
Well, yeah, that's because those are
Black
solo
Sabbath
projects,
is
though.
Black
You're
Sabbath is
comparing two
Tony
different things.
Iommi's solo career.
It is not.
It is. And he switches out singers and other members the exact same way Ozzy switches out guitar players, bassists, and drummers. Tony Iommi is and will always be the member that defines the Black Sabbath sound. And if you took him away, you wouldn't have Black Sabbath anymore. And this is just proven further by the fact that he's replaced every single member 100 times, and he's the only consistent member. And even if you look at his actual solo career, guess what it sounds like? Black Sabbath. Maybe that's because Tony Iommi is in it. Yeah, Tony Iommi is Black Sabbath. He is the reason why the band is legendary. So, as for why I have Black Sabbath at number one, Black Sabbath is at number one for me because they are the most important band that has ever existed in the rock and metal world. If it weren't for Black Sabbath, every single fucking band we have mentioned today, except for maybe the Beatles, would not exist in the form that they do. I don't remember the exact timeline. When was the last Beatles album?
They were before Black Sabbath.
The last Beatles album was before Black Sabbath. So you
Um,
could.
yeah, maybe. Well, like maybe a little bit
Well, I know the
after,
Beatles
but
existed
I don't
before
think they
Black
were
Sabbath. I want to know if the last album was before Black
I don't
Sabbath.
think Beatles were influenced by Black Sabbath.
That's not what I'm saying. So the Beatles' only song that even eclipses metal in any way is Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter is a song that you could argue is the first metal song ever, right? But Black Sabbath is the first metal band, inarguably. They're the ones that created the sound of metal, and they're the ones that are the reason bands like Judas Priest, Symphony X, Opeth, Dream Theater, all the bands that we listed that are metal, they exist because of Black Sabbath. If it weren't for Black Sabbath, I don't think we would have ever gotten these bands, at least not in the form that we have them. You know, maybe someone like the Beatles could have made a metal record at some point. You know, maybe Priest would have come out and eventually made metal. Someone would have done it, but it would have been different. It would have been different, and I don't think we would have gotten the same rich history of rock and metal that we have. So for that reason, Black Sabbath has to be number one. Who else can you put there? When your first love is metal and rock, who else do you put there? Jimi Hendrix? No. Who else is there? Cream? No. Not even the Beatles. Not even the Beatles. I actually would go on record saying that the Beatles aren't as important to musical history as Black Sabbath are, because the Beatles only really had a very short period of time where they were really influential. Nobody fucking cares about the boy band days of the Beatles. Nobody was creating music influenced by that except for maybe NSYNC.
One Direction. One
I said
Direction and
NSYNC.
Harry Styles' entire career.
No, One Direction based their entire career off of NSYNC. But
No, they based their entire career off the Beatles. If you say anything different, you haven't listened to enough One Direction. And I, for one, am pissed off that you do not listen to enough One Direction.
no, boy band Beatles suck. And your psychedelic era of the Beatles, yeah, sure, it was influential, but can you really say it was anywhere near the scale of Black Sabbath? No, you can't. It's really the later era of the Beatles that was super influential when they were
Well, I
doing
mean, I
all
would
kinds of
argue if it
crazy
weren't for the
things.
Beatles,
And
there wouldn't be a Black Sabbath. So,
no, you're right, but only really the later era of the Beatles is
true.
like relevant for influence. But in Black Sabbath's case, I think that pretty much their entire career was influential. Yeah, you could argue the early albums were the most influential, but look me in the eyes and tell me Mob Rules was not hugely influential. Even 13, the last album they put out, tons of fucking bands were inspired by that album.
Really, it just sounded like their like early stuff. I mean, that it's a good album, but how can you be
Every album they
influential
put
when you've
out.
already been inspired by yourself?
Inspired by yourself. No, what I'm saying is people have infinite respect for Black Sabbath, and even in their worst days, people were inspired by them. Even the album Forbidden inspired people like fucking Who's the like rap guy in Body Count?
Ice-T, he rapped on that.
Ice-T was on the album. Just think about that. Their worst fucking album, and the guy from Body Count was on it. I don't know what to tell you. For me, Black Sabbath is easily number one.
Well, that was our top 10 favorite bands and artists. What are your favorite bands and artists? Do you have favorite bands and artists? Who
No,
are
they
you?
just don't listen to music.
Do you even listen to music? Who are you? Why are you here? What are you doing? Please stop selling me things and leave me the fuck alone. But if you don't want to do that, you can always leave a comment down below and interact with us. Tell us what your favorite bands and artists are. Maybe mention something that we didn't mention about the bands that we picked. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't, maybe you hate us. I don't know, and I don't care.
Maybe this ending is long-winded.
I like that. But until next time, we bid you audio.
Audio do. Bye-bye.